The day I signed my divorce papers should have been the worst day of my life. At least, that's what everyone in the courtroom expected to see. My name is Claire Morgan, and after 16 years of marriage, my husband Marcus sat across from me wearing the kind of smile people only wear when they believe they've already won. Beside him sat his mother, Evelyn Hale, who never once tried to hide her satisfaction. She had spent years reminding me that I wasn't good enough for her son, and today, she finally believed she had proof. Marcus leaned back in his chair with absolute confidence as the judge finalized our divorce. He kept the beautiful house in Atlanta, the luxury Audi parked in the driveway, and every expensive possession people associated with our marriage. Even Sabrina Cole, the woman who had replaced me long before the paperwork was filed, sat proudly in the back of the courtroom with one hand resting on her pregnant belly. She looked at me with quiet pity, convinced she had inherited the perfect life. If anyone had walked into that courtroom without knowing the truth, they would have believed I was the woman who had lost everything. But appearances have a way of lying. I quietly signed every document placed in front of me, without arguing over a single asset. I didn't ask for the house. I didn't ask for the car. I didn't even ask Marcus why he had thrown away 16 years together for someone he had known less than a year. There was no point. Some answers only become clear after people are forced to live with their own choices. When the hearing ended, Marcus stood, adjusted his expensive suit, and walked toward me with the confidence of a man who believed he had conquered his greatest obstacle. "Claire," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes, "I hope one day you'll understand this was the best outcome for everyone." I simply nodded. "I already understand more than you think," he frowned slightly, clearly expecting anger instead of calm. Evelyn stepped beside him before I could leave. "You should be grateful Marcus took care of you for so many years," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Starting over at your age won't be easy." I smiled politely. "You're right about one thing." She looked almost pleased. "Starting over is never easy." Then I picked up my handbag and walked away without another word. Neither of them noticed that I wasn't crying. Neither of them wondered why I looked relieved instead of devastated. Outside the courthouse, my two children were waiting beside the car with our longtime family friend, Victor Grant. My daughter ran into my arms first. "Mom," she whispered, "are you okay?" I kissed her forehead and smiled. "I'm better than okay." My son looked back toward the courthouse where Marcus was laughing with Sabrina and the rest of his family. Dad didn't even say goodbye. His words hurt more than I wanted to admit, but I refused to let my children carry that pain. "Sometimes people become so focused on what they think they're gaining," I said softly, "that they stop seeing what they're losing." Victor quietly loaded our suitcases into the SUV without asking questions. He had known me for more than 20 years and understood that silence often carried more truth than conversation. As we pulled away from the courthouse, I looked once in the rearview mirror. Marcus wrapped his arm around Sabrina while photographers captured what they probably believed was the beginning of a perfect new chapter. They smiled for every camera. They celebrated every illusion. None of them realized the chapter they were celebrating had already ended before the ink on the divorce papers had dried. During the flight to Texas, my children eventually fell asleep beside me. I opened my laptop for the first time that day. Within seconds, my screen filled with messages waiting for my approval. Board members, international investors, corporate attorneys, financial advisors across 3 different time zones. At the very top sat one email marked urgent. Subject: awaiting CEO authorization. I read it once before, quietly pressing approve. Across the country, a series of automatic instructions immediately began moving through banking systems, corporate servers, and legal departments. Credit lines would be suspended. Ownership rights would be restored. Access privileges would disappear one by one. Marcus still believed he had walked away with the house, the luxury car, and the comfortable life he had always enjoyed. What he didn't know was that none of those things had ever truly belonged to him. By the time he discovered the truth, it would already be far too late. By the time our plane touched down in Houston, the sun had already begun sinking behind the clouds, turning the sky into long bands of gold and deep orange. My children pressed their faces against the window, excited by a city they had only seen in pictures. To them, Texas was a new adventure. To me, it was the first place I had chosen for myself in years. A black town car waited near the private terminal, and the driver greeted me by name before loading our luggage. My daughter looked up at me with surprise. "Mom, how does he know you?" I smiled and squeezed her hand. "Because I planned ahead." That was all I said. They had lived through enough confusion. They didn't need to understand every detail of the life I had hidden to protect their father's pride. During the drive, Victor Grant called through the secure line. He had served as my chief operating officer for 6 years, but more than that, he was one of the few people who knew exactly how much of my marriage had been built on silence. "You landed safely?" he asked. "We did." "Good. Then we can begin." His words carried no excitement, only precision. That was why I trusted him. Revenge makes people careless. Preparation makes them dangerous. Victor confirmed that Marcus's access to every corporate account had been permanently revoked. The Audi was already scheduled for recovery. The house lease would be terminated first thing Monday morning. More importantly, the legal department had finalized the acquisition documents for Harrison Regional Distribution, the parent company where Marcus worked as a mid-level sales director. I looked out at the wide Texas highway, watching the city lights rise in the distance. "Any complications?" I asked. "None," Victor replied. "The board is eager to close. Once you sign, TechCore Meridian takes full control." I closed my eyes for a moment. Marcus had spent years telling people he was the reason our family lived comfortably. He introduced himself as the provider, the decision maker, the man carrying everyone else. I let him believe it because, at first, I thought his confidence was harmless. Later, I realized it was the only thing holding his fragile ego together. Every promotion he bragged about, every luxury purchase he displayed, every dinner he used to impress clients had been quietly supported by a company he never bothered to understand. My company. 5 years earlier, I had started TechCore Meridian from a spare bedroom while Marcus complained that my little software projects took too much time away from him. I built the first platform while helping the children with homework. I negotiated contracts after midnight. I taught myself everything the investors assumed I already knew. By the time the company crossed its first $1 million in revenue, Marcus had barely noticed. He was too busy taking credit for the lifestyle my work created. Victor's voice brought me back. "Claire, I need your final authorization on the property transfer and executive control package." I opened my tablet. A secure dashboard appeared, listing every asset connected to the marriage. The Atlanta house, the Audi, the corporate cards, the insurance policies, even the membership at the private cigar lounge Marcus loved using to impress clients. Each line carried the same legal owner. TechCore Meridian Holdings. Marcus had never owned the life he was celebrating. He had only been permitted to use it. "Proceed," I said. A confirmation screen appeared. I pressed the button. One by one, the privileges he treated like birthrights began disappearing. The town car eventually turned through the iron gates of a quiet estate in Sugarland. My children fell silent as the house came into view. It wasn't designed to impress strangers. It was designed to feel safe. Warm limestone walls, wide windows, a courtyard shaded by oak trees, and a backyard opening toward a private lake. My son looked at me in disbelief. "Are we staying here?" "We're living here," I answered. The children rushed inside, their footsteps echoing through the open foyer. Within minutes, they were arguing over bedrooms and laughing for the first time in weeks. I stood alone near the doorway, listening to the sound. No raised voices, no criticism. No one walking on eggshells. Just children being children. I hadn't realized how much I missed that. In Atlanta, a very different celebration was beginning. Marcus had invited relatives, co-workers, and old college friends to the house he believed he had won. He served expensive food, opened bottles charged to the corporate card, and repeated the same story to anyone willing to listen. Claire had walked away with nothing. Evelyn praised him for finally choosing a woman who understood how to support a man. Sabrina moved through the party with one hand resting proudly on her stomach, accepting congratulations for the baby. Marcus had already started calling his heir. From the photographs later sent to me by a mutual acquaintance, everyone looked happy. Everyone except Daniel Turner. Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd, barely touching his drink, watching Sabrina whenever he thought no one else was looking. Nicole, his wife and Marcus's sister, kept asking whether he felt sick. He blamed the heat. But fear has a posture of its own, and Daniel carried it in every photograph. That evening, while my children explored the pool, Victor sent me one final update. The premium maternity appointment Marcus had booked for Monday morning remained active. The clinic payment had already been pre-authorized days before through my corporate account. I stared at the message, considering whether to cancel it. It would have been easy. One call, and the entire celebration would collapse before it began. Instead, I left the appointment untouched. Marcus had spent years believing the truth could be controlled if he spoke loudly enough. On Monday morning, he would enter that clinic expecting to meet the son he thought would complete his new life. I had no idea what the doctor would discover, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever truth was waiting inside that medical file belonged to them now. And for the first time in 16 years, I would not be there to protect any of them from it. Monday morning arrived with the kind of confidence only people living inside a lie can possess. Hundreds of miles away in Texas, I stood barefoot on the back patio, watching my children chase each other across the lawn, their laughter drifting over the quiet lake behind our new home. It was the first peaceful morning we'd shared in years. There were no arguments waiting inside the kitchen, no criticism disguised as advice, no tension hanging over breakfast. For the first time in a long time, the house felt like a home instead of a battlefield. I wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee, just as my phone vibrated. Victor Grant had already been awake for hours. "Everything is moving exactly as scheduled," his message read. "The acquisition closes this afternoon. Marcus still has no idea." I smiled faintly before locking my phone. There was nothing left for me to control. Every legal document had been signed. Every financial transfer had been approved. The rest would unfold through choices Marcus and the people around him had already made. Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, Marcus believed life had finally rewarded him for walking away from our marriage. The house buzzed with excitement from the moment everyone woke up. Evelyn insisted this wasn't just another doctor's appointment, it was the day the family would finally celebrate the grandson she had dreamed about for years. She ordered flowers delivered to the house before breakfast, reserved a private dining room at one of Atlanta's most expensive steakhouses, and proudly told neighbors that by sunset they would know the baby's gender. Sabrina played the role perfectly. She laughed easily, accepted every compliment with graceful confidence, and let everyone place their hands on her growing stomach. Watching the security photos later, I couldn't help noticing how convincing she looked. If I hadn't known the ending, I might have believed every smile myself. Marcus couldn't stop talking. During breakfast, he raised his coffee mug and grinned. This is exactly how life is supposed to feel. New wife, new baby, new beginning. Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed his shoulder proudly. "I told you all those years ago that Claire was holding you back. Look at you now." Marcus laughed. "You were right, Mom." Those words stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because they hurt anymore, but because they reminded me how easily people rewrite history when success blinds them. For 16 years, every achievement Marcus celebrated had quietly rested on sacrifices he never bothered to notice. Now he genuinely believed happiness had arrived the moment I disappeared. Across the room, Daniel Turner remained unusually quiet. Nicole noticed immediately. "You've hardly said 2 words this morning," she whispered. "Everything okay?" Daniel forced a smile that convinced no one. Didn't sleep much. He blamed work stress, then allergies, then a headache. Every excuse sounded weaker than the one before it. I didn't know exactly what Daniel was thinking, but guilt has a language of its own. You can see it in the way someone avoids eye contact, checks their phone every few minutes, or laughs half a second too late. He wasn't acting like a man celebrating good news. He looked like someone counting the minutes until bad news arrived. Around 10 o'clock, The family climbed into two luxury SUVs and headed toward Atlanta Women's Medical Center. Marcus drove with one hand resting proudly on Sabrina's knee while talking about baby names. "If it's a boy," he said confidently, "I'm naming him after my grandfather." Sabrina smiled, though it never quite reached her eyes. Daniel, riding in the second vehicle with Nicole, stared silently out the window for most of the drive. Every traffic light seemed to make him more uncomfortable. Every mile brought him closer to a truth he desperately hoped would stay buried. In Texas, my children asked if we could spend the afternoon decorating their new bedrooms. I agreed without hesitation. We painted one wall bright blue for my son, unpacked family photographs, and hung my daughter's favorite paintings above her bed. Somewhere between assembling bookshelves and opening moving boxes, I realized something unexpected. I hadn't thought about Marcus once in nearly 3 hours. That surprised me. For months, my entire world had revolved around surviving his betrayal. Now, for the first time, my life was beginning to revolve around something much healthier, building a future instead of mourning a past. Shortly after noon, Victor called again. "Claire," he said, "the acquisition team is entering the final board meeting. Any resistance?" "None. By this evening, Harrison Regional Distribution officially belongs to TechCore Meridian." I looked across the lake where my children were laughing as they skipped stones across the water. "Good," I answered softly. "Let's finish it." Before hanging up, Victor hesitated. "There's one more thing." "What is it?" Our contact at the medical center confirmed Marcus insisted on inviting almost the entire family into the ultrasound room. Apparently, he wants everyone there when they announce the baby's gender. I remained silent for a moment. Then I hope they're all ready to hear whatever truth is waiting for them. I ended the call and slipped my phone back into my pocket. I wasn't hoping anyone would suffer. Despite everything Marcus had done, part of me still wished he would somehow wake up before life taught him its lesson the hard way. But truth doesn't negotiate with hope. It arrives exactly when it's ready. At almost that same moment, Marcus held Sabrina's hand as they walked through the glass doors of the private clinic, smiling for family photos and joking with the nurses about finally meeting the little boy who would carry on the Hale family name. None of them noticed the expression on Dr. Richard Lawson's face as he quietly opened Marcus's medical history. Within seconds, his confident smile faded. He read one page, then read it again. Whatever he had just discovered wasn't a small mistake. It was the kind of truth capable of destroying every person waiting inside that room. I didn't know exactly what was happening inside Atlanta Women's Medical Center that morning, but I had a feeling the truth had finally caught up with everyone who had been running from it. While my children unpacked boxes upstairs, I stood alone in my new home office overlooking the lake, signing the last acquisition documents that would officially transfer Harrison Regional Distribution into TechCore Meridian's portfolio. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, all I felt was relief. For 16 years, I had measured success by how well I could hold a broken family together. That morning, for the first time, I measured it by how peacefully my children laughed in the next room. Sometimes winning doesn't sound like applause. Sometimes it sounds like silence after years of chaos. Hundreds of miles away, Marcus walked confidently through the private clinic with one arm wrapped around Sabrina's waist. Evelyn proudly carried a small gift bag filled with blue baby clothes she had already purchased because she was convinced her first grandson was finally on the way. Nicole and Daniel followed behind them. Daniel looked even paler than he had at breakfast. Every few seconds he glanced toward Sabrina, only to quickly look away whenever she noticed. Nobody else seemed to see it. Excitement has a way of blinding people to the smallest warning signs. A cheerful nurse escorted the family into one of the clinic's premium ultrasound suites. Marcus couldn't stop smiling. "This kid already has the whole family wrapped around his finger," he joked as everyone laughed. Evelyn leaned toward Sabrina and gently touched her shoulder. "This baby is going to heal everything our family has been through." Sitting quietly in the corner, Daniel lowered his eyes without saying a word. Moments later, Dr. Richard Lawson entered carrying a tablet containing Sabrina's prenatal records. He greeted everyone politely before introducing himself. "Good morning. Before we begin the ultrasound, I'd like to verify a few details in your medical history. Marcus nodded confidently. Of course, doctor. Dr. Lawson reviewed Sabrina's file first. Everything appeared routine. Then he opened Marcus's chart, which had been transferred automatically from another hospital because Marcus had listed himself as the biological father. As his eyes moved across the screen, his expression changed almost imperceptibly. It wasn't shock. It was confusion. He quietly scrolled back to the previous page and read the report again. Then he checked the patient identification number a second time. Marcus noticed immediately. Is something wrong? He asked with a nervous laugh. Dr. Lawson looked up carefully. Mr. Hale, have you had any surgical procedures within the past 5 years that I should be aware of? Marcus shrugged. Nothing serious, just a minor outpatient procedure a few years ago. Do you remember what it was? Marcus hesitated for a moment before answering. Honestly, not really. It was after Nicole and Daniel's wedding. My family doctor recommended it because Claire and I weren't planning to have more children. Dr. Lawson slowly nodded while returning his eyes to the screen. The room became noticeably quieter. Evelyn looked from Marcus to the doctor, clearly sensing something had changed. Doctor, she asked, is there a problem with the baby? Doctor. Lawson chose his next words carefully. At this moment, I can't comment on the pregnancy until I clarify something in Mr. Hale's medical history. Marcus forced another smile. You're making everyone nervous. That isn't my intention. The doctor turned the tablet slightly toward himself again. I simply want to make certain these records are accurate before we continue. He left the room for several minutes to contact the hospital's records department. The cheerful atmosphere disappeared almost instantly. Nobody spoke much while waiting. Sabrina stared at the floor, twisting her engagement ring nervously around her finger. Daniel repeatedly checked his watch without realizing he had done it at least 6 times. Nicole quietly asked whether he was feeling sick again. He nodded but offered no explanation. Marcus paced slowly near the window, trying to laugh off the unexpected delay, but I imagine even he could feel something invisible pressing against the room. Sometimes people recognize the moment their lives are about to change without understanding why. 10 minutes later, Dr. Lawson returned carrying a printed medical file. His face remained calm, professional, and unreadable. He closed the examination room door behind him before taking his seat. Instead of reaching for the ultrasound equipment, he placed the file gently on the desk and folded his hands together. Mr. Hale, he said quietly, before we examine the baby, there's something in your medical history that we need to discuss first. At that exact moment, every smile inside the room disappeared. None of them knew it yet, but the conversation about to begin had nothing to do with the baby's gender. It was about to expose a truth that would leave an entire family questioning everything they believed only minutes earlier. The room fell completely silent the moment Dr. Richard Lawson placed Marcus's medical file on the desk. No one reached for the ultrasound monitor anymore. No one asked whether the baby was a boy or a girl. The excitement that had filled the room only minutes earlier seemed to disappear without a sound. I wasn't there to witness it myself, but later, through the official medical records and the statements collected afterward, I could picture every expression with painful clarity. Doctor. Lawson looked directly at Marcus before speaking. Mr. Hale, I need to ask you one final question before we continue. Did you ever inform your current partner about a vasectomy you underwent approximately 4 years ago? Marcus blinked in confusion. My... what? The doctor remained calm. A vasectomy. Marcus let out a small laugh, convinced there had been some kind of mistake. Doctor, I think you've mixed up my records with someone else's. Doctor, Lawson quietly turned the file around so Marcus could see the documents himself. I've already verified your identity twice. Your full name, date of birth, social security number, and surgical records all match. According to these records, the procedure was completed successfully, and multiple follow-up tests confirmed permanent sterility. The words landed like a hammer. Evelyn stared at her son, waiting for him to correct the doctor. Sabrina's smile slowly disappeared. Daniel stopped breathing for what felt like several seconds. Marcus shook his head immediately. That's impossible. His voice grew louder. There has to be an error. We're here because my girlfriend is pregnant with my baby. Doctor. Lawson didn't argue. He simply spoke with the same professional tone he had used from the beginning. Medicine isn't based on assumptions, Mr. Hale. It's based on evidence. According to your medical history, natural conception would be medically impossible unless the procedure had failed. Marcus grabbed the papers with trembling hands, scanning every page as though reading them faster might somehow change the outcome. Then his expression shifted. Confusion became recognition. Recognition became fear. Finally, he whispered something so quietly that only the people closest to him could hear. I remember. Evelyn frowned. Remember what? Marcus swallowed hard. Claire and I decided we didn't want more children after our son was born. My doctor recommended a vasectomy, and I agreed. He looked back at the report, his face completely drained of color. I never thought about it again. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. The truth had arrived without anger, without accusation, and without mercy. Sabrina suddenly stepped backward until she felt the wall behind her. Her breathing became shallow. She avoided looking at Marcus entirely. Nicole noticed immediately. Sabrina, she said cautiously, why won't you look at him? Sabrina didn't answer. Marcus slowly turned toward her, still holding the medical file in his shaking hands. Tell me the doctor is wrong. His voice cracked. Tell me this baby is mine. Tears gathered in Sabrina's eyes, but she couldn't force the words out. The silence between them became unbearable. Evelyn looked from Marcus to Sabrina, then back again. Somebody say something, she demanded. Doctor. Lawson quietly closed the medical file. I'm afraid there isn't any medical explanation that changes these results. The room seemed smaller now, as though the walls themselves had moved closer. Marcus stared at Sabrina, desperately searching her face for even the smallest sign that this nightmare could still be undone. Instead, he saw guilt, real guilt, the kind that no lie can completely hide. His shoulders slowly dropped as the realization settled over him. This wasn't a mistake in the hospital's records. This wasn't a laboratory error. The life he had imagined over the past several months, the new beginning, the growing family, the future he had proudly celebrated had been built on a foundation that no longer existed. He took one slow step backward, barely able to keep his balance. If the baby isn't mine, he whispered, his voice breaking beneath the weight of the question he never imagined asking. Then, whose baby is it? No one answered. But every pair of eyes in the room had already begun drifting toward the same person. And Daniel Turner suddenly realized there was nowhere left to hide. No one spoke for what felt like an eternity. The silence inside the examination room became heavier than any argument could have been. Marcus stood frozen, his eyes locked on Sabrina's face, desperately waiting for her to deny what the medical report had already made impossible to ignore. Instead, she lowered her head. That single movement told him more than any confession ever could. Sabrina, Marcus whispered, barely recognizing his own voice. Please tell me there's another explanation. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she still couldn't answer. Evelyn stepped forward, her patience finally breaking. Look at him, she shouted. If you have something to say it now. Sabrina slowly lifted her head. For a brief second, she looked at Marcus with genuine regret. I never wanted it to happen like this, she said quietly. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. Like what? She closed her eyes. I never planned to hurt you. Marcus let out a hollow laugh. Then who? The question hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Finally, Sabrina turned her head toward the far corner of the room. Every person there instinctively followed her gaze. Daniel Turner looked as though every ounce of strength had left his body. Nicole frowned in confusion before looking at her husband. Daniel? She asked softly. Why is she looking at you? Daniel couldn't answer. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he stared at the floor. Marcus slowly turned toward him. Daniel. His voice was calm now, almost frighteningly calm. Look at me. Daniel remained silent, Marcus took one step closer. Look at me. When Daniel finally raised his eyes, Marcus saw everything he needed to know. Shame, fear, regret. None of it belonged to an innocent man. How long? Marcus asked. Daniel swallowed hard before answering. About 8 months. Nicole gasped as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. 8 months? She repeated. You've been sleeping with her for 8 months? Daniel nodded weakly. It started after one of the company charity events. Sabrina covered her face, unable to stop crying. We kept telling ourselves it would end, she whispered. But every time we tried, we made another mistake. Marcus laughed again, but there was no humor left in the sound. Another mistake? He looked from Sabrina to Daniel and back again. You call months of lying a mistake? No one answered. Doctor. Lawson quietly stepped toward the door, recognizing that the conversation had moved far beyond medicine. Nicole suddenly walked toward Daniel, tears streaming down her face. I stood beside you, she said, her voice shaking. I trusted you. I defended you. And all this time. She couldn't finish the sentence. Daniel reached toward her instinctively. Nicole, please. She stepped back before he could touch her. Don't. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Don't ever touch me again. Marcus remained perfectly still. That frightened everyone more than if he had exploded in anger. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't throwing furniture. He simply looked like a man watching his entire life collapse one painful truth at a time. Finally, he looked at Sabrina one last time. Was any of it real? He asked. Sabrina hesitated before answering. At first, yes. She wiped away another tear. But somewhere along the way, I stopped knowing who I really was. Marcus nodded slowly. So did I. Those 4 words seemed to drain the last bit of strength from the room. Evelyn, who had spent years blaming Claire for every problem in the family, lowered herself into a chair without saying a word. For the first time in her life, there was no one else left to blame. Every choice that had brought them here belonged to the people sitting in that room. Marcus looked toward the ultrasound monitor that had never been switched on. Just an hour earlier, he had imagined hearing his baby's heartbeat for the first time. Instead, he had discovered that the future he had been celebrating had never existed. He quietly placed the medical file back on the doctor's desk and walked toward the door. Marcus, Sabrina called after him. He stopped but never turned around. I'm sorry. He stood there for several long seconds before answering. No. His voice was steady but completely empty. You're sorry because the truth found us. If this report had never existed, you would have kept lying to me. He opened the door and walked out alone. Behind him, the room remained frozen in silence. But outside, another part of his carefully built life was already beginning to collapse. At almost that same moment, his phone vibrated repeatedly inside his jacket pocket. He ignored it, unaware that the messages flooding his screen had nothing to do with Sabrina, the baby, or his family. They were coming from his bank, his employer, and the company whose name appeared on every credit card he believed belonged to him. By the end of the day, betrayal would no longer be the greatest loss he suffered. I didn't hear about what happened at the clinic until much later, but I knew the exact moment Marcus's world truly began falling apart. It wasn't when Sabrina betrayed him. It wasn't when Daniel confessed. It was when he finally realized that the life he believed he controlled had never really been his. According to the security footage and financial records reviewed during the investigation, Marcus drove aimlessly through Atlanta for nearly an hour after leaving the medical center. He ignored every phone call from his mother, every message from Sabrina, and every notification flashing across his dashboard. Eventually, he pulled into the private cigar lounge where he had entertained clients for years. It was the place he always visited whenever he needed to convince himself everything would somehow be fine. The valet greeted him with the same familiar smile. Good afternoon, Mr. Hale. Marcus forced a tired nod and walked inside. The lounge manager welcomed him personally, just as he always had. Your usual table is ready. Marcus ordered the most expensive whiskey on the menu, without even looking at the price. He needed something to silence the chaos in his head. As the waiter placed the glass on the table, Marcus reached into his wallet and handed over the black executive card he had used hundreds of times before. The waiter returned less than a minute later, looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir. Your card was declined." Marcus frowned. "Run it again." The waiter did exactly that. A second later, the answer was the same. "Transaction declined." Marcus sighed impatiently and pulled out another card. Then another. Platinum, business, premium rewards. One after another, every payment was rejected. Nearby, conversations began to grow quieter as people noticed the exchange. Marcus could feel strangers watching him, but pride refused to let him leave. "There has to be a problem with your system," he insisted. The manager walked over, carrying a portable payment terminal. "Let's try one more time." Marcus handed him the final corporate card in his wallet. The manager inserted it carefully. A message appeared almost instantly. "Account closed. Authorization revoked." The manager looked at Marcus with genuine sympathy. "Mr. Hale, this card has been permanently deactivated." Marcus immediately pulled out his phone and opened his banking application. Instead of his usual account summary, a notification filled the screen. "Your authorized user privileges have been removed. Please contact the account owner for further information." His stomach tightened. Authorized user? He refreshed the page. The message didn't change. He opened another financial app. Same result. Then another. Every corporate expense account, travel account, executive card, and investment portal displayed the same notice. Access denied. Authorization revoked. For the first time that day, panic replaced anger. He called the customer service number printed on the back of the card. After verifying his identity, the representative spoke politely. "Mr. Hale, according to our records, your spending privileges ended this morning following instructions from the primary account holder." Marcus gripped the phone tighter. "Who is the primary account holder?" There was a brief pause. "TechCore Meridian Holdings." Marcus frowned. "That's impossible." "I'm sorry, sir, but every account associated with your profile belongs to TechCore Meridian Holdings." "Who owns TechCore Meridian?" Another pause. "I'm unable to discuss ownership details beyond confirming that your access has been terminated." The line went silent. Marcus slowly lowered the phone, staring blankly at the screen. He replayed the conversation over and over in his mind. For years, he had assumed those executive accounts existed because of his success. He never questioned where the approvals came from. He never wondered why every increase in his spending limit happened automatically. He simply accepted the lifestyle and convinced himself he had earned every piece of it. Across the city, I was helping my daughter arrange books on a shelf in her new bedroom when Victor called. "The first phase is complete," he said quietly. "Every corporate account has been transferred back to TechCore Meridian. Marcus no longer has financial access to anything connected to the company." I looked around the room filled with unpacked boxes, children's drawings, and the simple life we were beginning to build together. "Did he make a scene?" Victor gave a small laugh. "No, that's the surprising part." According to the manager, he just sat there for several minutes without saying a word. I closed my eyes for a moment. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't enjoy imagining Marcus sitting alone in that lounge. Despite everything, I remembered the young man I had married years earlier, the one who dreamed big, worked hard, and believed we could build a beautiful future together. Somewhere along the way, ambition had quietly turned into entitlement, and entitlement had blinded him to the truth. Before ending the call, Victor spoke again. "Claire, there's one more notification." "Go ahead." "The property management company has officially scheduled the repossession of the Atlanta residence tomorrow morning. Movers have already been dispatched." I looked out the window toward the calm water beyond the backyard. "Then tomorrow," I said softly, "Marcus finally learns the difference between owning something and simply being allowed to use it." The following morning, Marcus woke up in a downtown hotel with a splitting headache and the false hope that yesterday had simply been the worst day of his life. He convinced himself that people recovered from heartbreak every day. Relationships ended. Families fell apart. He could survive that. What he still didn't understand was that yesterday had only destroyed the illusion. Today would take everything else. Around 9 o'clock, his phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of his neighborhood property manager. Marcus answered without much thought. "Mr. Hale," the woman said politely, "I'm calling regarding the residence on Willow Creek Drive. Our relocation team has arrived, but we haven't been able to reach the property owner. We were told you might still be inside." Marcus frowned. "What relocation team?" There was a brief silence. "The team authorized to recover the property." Marcus sat upright in bed. "Recover the property? What are you talking about?" "That's my house." "I'm sorry, sir," the manager replied carefully, "but according to our records, the residence is owned by TechCore Meridian Holdings. The occupancy agreement assigned to you was officially terminated this morning." Marcus's heart began pounding. "You're wrong." "I assure you, sir, we've verified the paperwork several times." Without another word, Marcus hung up, grabbed his keys, and drove toward the house as fast as traffic allowed. The moment he turned onto his street, he slammed on the brakes. Two large moving trucks were parked in front of the driveway. Workers wearing company uniforms carefully carried furniture through the front door, while another crew photographed every room before packing the remaining contents into numbered storage containers. Marcus jumped out of his SUV and ran toward the entrance. "Stop!" he shouted. "What do you think you're doing?" The crew leader calmly held up a clipboard. "Mr. Marcus Hale?" "Yes." "We've been instructed to complete the property recovery today." Marcus snatched the paperwork from his hands. Every page carried official legal seals and signatures. The ownership records were unmistakable. TechCore Meridian Holdings. His name appeared nowhere, except under the section labeled Former Authorized Occupant. He looked back at the crew in disbelief. "This has to be a mistake." The supervisor shook his head sympathetically. "Sir, we've confirmed everything with the attorneys twice this morning." Marcus pushed past them and rushed inside the house. The place already looked unfamiliar. Family photographs had been carefully boxed. The living room where he once hosted holiday parties sat half empty. Kitchen cabinets stood open while workers wrapped dishes in protective paper. Even the bedroom closet had been cleared except for a few garments waiting to be packed. Every step through the house felt like walking through the remains of a life that no longer belonged to him. He opened the garage door, hoping at least one thing remained unchanged. The space where the black Audi had always been parked was empty. He spun around just as a flatbed truck slowly pulled away from the curb with the vehicle securely fastened to its trailer. "That's my car!" Marcus yelled, running toward the street. The driver stopped long enough to hand him another document through the window. "Vehicle recovery order, sir." Marcus barely glanced at it. The title listed TechCore Meridian Holdings as the registered owner. The recovery had been scheduled weeks earlier, pending final authorization. He watched helplessly as the Audi disappeared around the corner. For several long seconds, he simply stood in the middle of the street, unable to move. Neighbors peeked through curtains and front windows. A few quietly watched from their porches, whispering among themselves as movers carried expensive furniture out of the house Marcus had proudly called his own only 2 days earlier. Pride had once made him enjoy being the center of attention in this neighborhood. Now it felt unbearable. Across the country, I was helping my son assemble a desk for his new room when Victor called with a routine update. "The property transfer has been completed," he said. Everything went smoothly. I tightened one final screw before setting the toolbox aside. "Any problems?" "None." The recovery team said Marcus was shocked but cooperative. I nodded quietly. "Good." My son looked up from arranging his books. "Mom, are we really never going back to Atlanta?" I smiled gently. "We're not leaving our memories behind." I rested my hand on his shoulder. "We're just choosing not to live inside them anymore." After the call ended, I stepped outside onto the back patio. For months, I had imagined this day would bring satisfaction. It didn't. There was no joy in watching someone lose a home, even someone who had betrayed me. Houses can be replaced, cars can be bought again. But the moment trust disappears from a family, no moving company in the world can ever put everything back where it once belonged. Meanwhile, Marcus remained standing alone in the empty driveway, holding a folder filled with legal documents that had quietly erased the life he believed he owned. Then his phone vibrated once more. This time the caller wasn't a bank or a property manager. It was the human resources director from Harrison Regional Distribution. And somehow, before he even answered, Marcus already knew his worst day wasn't over yet. By late afternoon, Marcus had stopped trying to convince himself that the day could get any worse. The house was gone. The car was gone. Every financial privilege he had once taken for granted had disappeared in less than 24 hours. As he sat alone inside his hotel room, staring at the stack of legal documents spread across the bed, his phone rang again. This time, the caller ID read Harrison Regional Distribution, Human Resources. Marcus closed his eyes before answering. Somehow, he already knew why they were calling. Mr. Hale, the voice on the other end said professionally, "We'd like you to attend a mandatory executive meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Attendance is required for all management personnel." Marcus frowned. "What's the meeting about?" "I'm afraid that information will be shared during the presentation." The call ended less than a minute later. For the rest of the evening, Marcus convinced himself this might finally be the one piece of good news he desperately needed. Perhaps the company was restructuring. Maybe he was about to receive the promotion he'd been chasing for years. After everything he had lost, he clung to the hope that at least his career remained untouched. The next morning, he arrived at company headquarters, wearing the same confidence he had practiced before every important meeting throughout his career. He adjusted his tie in the elevator mirror and reminded himself that work was different. No one there knew about the clinic. No one knew about the house. Inside the executive conference room, senior managers filled every seat. Conversations stopped briefly as Marcus entered. Several coworkers offered polite smiles, though many avoided eye contact. Marcus assumed they were simply nervous about another corporate announcement. A few minutes later, the room lights dimmed. The chairman of the board stepped onto the stage beside a large presentation screen. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice." The first slide appeared behind him. "Welcome to a new chapter. As of this morning," the chairman continued, "Harrison Regional Distribution has officially become part of TechCore Meridian Holdings." A quiet wave of surprise moved through the audience. Marcus sat a little straighter. He had heard rumors of a possible acquisition, but no one had expected it to happen so quickly. The chairman smiled. "It is my pleasure to introduce the founder, majority shareholder, and new chief executive officer of TechCore Meridian." The auditorium doors opened. Every person in the room turned toward the entrance. Marcus looked as well, and felt the blood drain from his face. I walked calmly toward the stage, wearing a navy business suit instead of the quiet clothes he had grown used to seeing during our marriage. Victor Grant walked beside me, carrying the acquisition documents. Behind us followed members of the executive leadership team I had worked with for years. No one in the room looked surprised except Marcus. He stared at me as though he were seeing a stranger. The chairman extended his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Claire Morgan." Applause filled the room. Marcus didn't clap. He couldn't. He remained frozen in his chair while the world he thought he understood quietly collapsed around him. I thanked the board before stepping to the podium. Looking across the audience, I saw dozens of curious faces and one completely broken man. For a brief moment, our eyes met. 16 years of marriage passed between us without either of us speaking a word. Then I began my presentation. I spoke about innovation, responsibility, and the future of the company. I congratulated employees for their hard work and promised stability during the transition. Not once did I mention our marriage. Not once did I embarrass Marcus. This wasn't the place for personal revenge. It was a place for leadership. When the presentation ended, the chairman returned to the microphone. "Before we conclude," he said, "there is one personnel matter that must be addressed." The room became quiet again. Following an internal review conducted during the acquisition process, Mr. Marcus Hale's employment with Harrison Regional Distribution is terminated effective immediately due to multiple violations of the company's ethics and disclosure policies. Marcus slowly stood. "This is because of her," he said. pointing directly at me. She's doing this because we're divorced. I looked at him calmly, but didn't answer. Instead, Victor stepped forward and handed the chairman a folder. The investigation began 3 months before the acquisition, Victor explained. The findings include falsified expense reports, unauthorized use of corporate assets, and repeated violations of executive compliance standards. The chairman nodded. The decision was approved unanimously by the Independent Review Committee before Miss Perners. Morgan assumed operational control. Marcus looked around the room, searching for anyone to defend him. No one did. His coworkers lowered their eyes. Some looked genuinely saddened. Others simply looked disappointed. Finally, Marcus turned back toward me. You planned all of this. I met his gaze quietly. No, Marcus. My voice remained steady. I planned to protect what I built. The rest came from the choices you made long before I walked away. Security officers approached respectfully and asked Marcus to surrender his company identification badge. He removed it slowly, staring at the name printed beneath his photograph. A badge he had once worn with pride now felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. As he placed it into the officer's hand, he realized something painful. He hadn't lost his career because I became successful. He had lost it because, little by little, he had stopped being the man worthy of keeping it. As Marcus walked toward the exit, he turned back one final time. Our eyes met across the silent conference room. He opened his mouth as though he wanted to say something, but no words came. Some apologies arrive too late. Some truths arrive exactly when they should. And although Marcus had now lost his family, his home, and his career, the hardest conversation of his life was still waiting for him. The conference room remained silent long after Marcus walked out. No one rushed to follow him. No one whispered behind his back. The applause that had welcomed me only minutes earlier had been replaced by quiet reflection. Success has a strange way of revealing people's true character. Some celebrate it with humility. Others mistake borrowed privilege for something they earned. Marcus had spent years believing the life around him was proof of his own greatness. He never stopped to ask who had built the foundation beneath his feet. As the meeting came to an end, board members congratulated me on the acquisition, but my thoughts were somewhere else. I wasn't thinking about the company. I was thinking about my children waiting for me at home. They had lost enough over the past year. They deserved a mother who looked forward instead of backward. Victor Grant walked beside me as we left the building. Everything's finished, he said quietly. The acquisition is complete. The legal cases are closed. There's nothing left for you to fight. I looked through the glass doors toward the city skyline. That's exactly what I wanted. He smiled. Most people would call this revenge. I slowly shook my head. No. After a brief pause, I added, revenge would have required me to spend the rest of my life thinking about Marcus. I'd rather spend the rest of my life thinking about my children. Victor nodded without another word. He understood the difference. Winning isn't always about watching someone else lose. Sometimes it's simply having the freedom to stop carrying the weight they left behind. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected email from Marcus. It wasn't long. There were no excuses. No accusations. No attempts to blame anyone else. The subject line simply read, I finally understand. I stared at it for several minutes before opening it. Claire, it began, I've rewritten this letter more times than I can count because every version sounded like I was trying to defend myself. The truth is, there isn't anything left to defend. I spent years believing success belonged to the loudest person in the room. I took credit for sacrifices I never made. I accepted your kindness as though it were something I deserved, instead of something you chose to give me. Losing the house, the job, and the money wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing I stopped appreciating the woman who quietly built the life I was so proud to show off. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a reply. I only hope that one day our children will grow up knowing their father finally accepted responsibility for the choices that destroyed our family. Please tell them, I never stopped loving them, even when I stopped being the man they deserved. I finished reading and quietly closed my laptop. For a long time, I simply sat there looking across the lake outside my office window. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't satisfied either. I just felt finished. That evening, my son asked if we could ride our bicycles around the neighborhood before dinner. My daughter wanted to show me the painting she had been working on for school. As we laughed together beneath the Texas sunset, I realized something that hadn't been true in years. We were no longer surviving our past. We were finally creating new memories untouched by betrayal, fear, or disappointment. Before bedtime, my daughter wrapped her arms around me. "Mom," she whispered, "are we going to be okay?" I kissed the top of her head and smiled. "We already are." She looked up at me. "Because we have this house?" I gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "No, sweetheart." I looked around the room where moving boxes had finally disappeared, replaced by family photographs, books, and laughter. Because a home isn't built with walls. It's built by the people who choose to love each other honestly every single day. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, I stepped onto the back porch and watched the moonlight shimmer across the lake. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. For years, I believed losing my marriage meant losing the life I had worked so hard to build. I couldn't have been more wrong. Sometimes life doesn't fall apart to punish us. Sometimes it falls apart because it's making room for something healthier to take its place. Looking back now, I don't remember the divorce as the day my world ended. I remember it as the day I finally stopped living someone else's version of happiness and started building my own. If this story leaves you with one lesson, let it be this: never measure your worth by the person who failed to see your value. The people who betray you may walk away with your trust for a while, but they can never take your integrity, your resilience, or your ability to begin again. Build your future so well that your greatest answer is not revenge, but the peaceful life you create after the storm has passed. Thank you for spending this journey with us. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what lesson stayed with you the most. And if you believe stories about family, betrayal, redemption, and second chances still matter, don't forget to subscribe to Calm Family Karma. Until next time, take care of the people who truly stand beside you, because genuine love will always be worth more than anything money can buy.